Today, we're going to talk about how to launch your no-code app early by building and launching a pilot app. It's so easy to get caught up in the terminology around apps. You could be building an MVP, a minimum viable product, a prototype, an MMP, an MLP, all of the things. But what I've found is actually happening in the background is regardless of what term or label you attach to the app you're building and launching, most people are actually building a full scope app leading up to their very first launch. Now, this can lead to a lot of problems once you get to the point of trying to scale your app and your business. And so today, we're going to talk about what a pilot app is, why you should attach yourself to this term, and how it's going to help you achieve an earlier launch and earlier growth in scale with your app. Now, make sure you stick around until the end, because if you have not launched your no-code app yet, this is one you really need to see if you want to launch anytime in the near future. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we help non-technical entrepreneurs build apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding, no technical background required. So we guide our own entrepreneurs on how to build pilot versions of their apps because of all the benefits that it brings and all the pitfalls it helps them avoid. So we're going to head over to the whiteboard here. So when you unintentionally end up building a full scope app, a few things end up happening. Now, if you haven't launched your app yet, and especially if you've already started your development and maybe you've been in development for more than a few months at this point, this is something that you're likely building. You are likely unintentionally building a full scope app, even though you might be thinking or aiming at building an MVP, for example. Or if you've been in the planning stages with your app, so maybe you haven't started development yet, but you've been planning out the features and the functionality and all of the different details of your app, and that planning has taken more than a few months now, then you will likely end up building a full scope app because you've just put so much into the planning. These steps initially should actually be pretty fast. So again, I see most people unintentionally building a full scope app. But what happens when they do this is, number one, they end up building too much all at once. So too many features, they go outside of what the initial scope actually should be. And really what that kind of couples with is making too many assumptions. Okay. Now, when you are building the first version of your app, you are going to be making some assumptions. That's what you're doing, right? Now, ideally, hopefully, you have taken the time to validate your app idea, but notice that I didn't say validate your app. I said your app idea. So even though you validated your app idea, now you need to actually validate the product and how it solves the problem you're intending to solve. So when you validated your idea, the first version that you're building is still built on assumptions. You are assuming how the product will best suit your prospective users' needs. Even if you're building the app for yourself, you're still making assumptions on how you would implement it into your processes. Now, we want to limit the amount of assumptions we make for obvious reasons, right? You really want to be building based on data and trends. So when you build too much all at once, you're making way too many assumptions. That's something that you want to move away from. And ultimately, you really just end up launching late. I see people launching after 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, or more. I mean, I've seen it happen so many times. People come to us and they tell us all the struggles they've had for that long, and they've never brought a single user on board. And usually it's because of these things, right? Building too much, making too many assumptions, and either launching late or potentially not launching at all because the product is just too big, and you kind of end up in this cycle of just trying to make the product perfect before that first launch. But that's the wrong goal to have, and perfect shouldn't even be the goal in the first place. So this is what I see with full scope apps. Now, a pilot app is what we're looking at today as the alternative. Okay, so with a pilot app, this is something that you want to test on a smaller scale to see how viable it will be on a larger scale. So a pilot app is something that you build to solve a single core problem. You test how effectively it solves that core problem, and then you learn how you can solve that core problem at a larger scale, right? Meaning more times, more users, right? That type of thing. So a pilot app is something that you're really looking to launch for product validation. And the first users you bring on board, your beta users, they don't have to be coming on board in a hands-off way, meaning this is not about putting up a landing page, having your full user onboarding completely automated, running Facebook ads to the landing page. And that's not what a pilot app is. A pilot app is something that solves a user's core problem. And when you bring your first beta users on board, you may manually bring them on board and then see and take feedback and understand how it does solve their problem, or maybe how it doesn't and how it could solve it better. And you're testing for how you can now introduce this product at a larger scale. So in that more hands-off way, in a more automated way, in a more scalable way. Okay, that's what you're looking at with a pilot app. Now, when you do this, what ends up happening is you build what's needed. Now, notice I said needed and not wanted. Users' needs and wants are very different. With a pilot app, you're building what's needed because, again, you're testing on how that core problem is solved. Okay, the wants can come later, and they should come later. And what happens is you limit your assumptions, which is very good. Remember, you're making assumptions regardless. It's impossible not to. You want to make them educated assumptions, but that's kind of how it goes. When you launch a pilot app, you can limit those by a lot, which is good, because when you limit your assumptions, it means you're not rebuilding after you launch, right? If you're making a bunch of assumptions, chances are you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. So you want to shrink those down as much as you can so that you can avoid as much rebuilding as possible, right? So ultimately, building a pilot enables you to launch a lot earlier, a lot earlier. We're looking at a time frame of a few months, ideally, from idea to having your first beta users on board. That's how quickly you can be launching, especially with no-code tools, right? As a non-technical founder, that's the time frame you can be looking at. But you have to be focusing on a pilot app versus a full scope app, okay? Now, what's really cool is that a pilot app enables you to build the app with your users, not for your users. Now, that might sound a little bit weird, but let's dig into that a little bit. See, when you build a full scope app right out of the gates, and you're launching what really is a full scope app, and you end up building too much, making too many assumptions and launching late, this is the trajectory you are following. And ultimately, you are going to be getting a lot of very poor feedback on your app. Because again, well, for a few reasons, really. One, there's just too much app for users to be giving feedback on. You want to give your beta users a structured way to give you feedback so that you can get actionable feedback, because otherwise you're just going to have a collection of thoughts, comments, Complaints, I mean, you name it, and you're not going to know what to do with them. The app is just too big. There's no structure. Users aren't going to be able to give you that actionable feedback, nor are they probably going to want to, because it's going to be a very big task for them coming onto a full scope app as the very first version, right? But also, I mean, there are just so many features that if users are going through and you're asking them different questions on, trying to get feedback on different components of the app, again, it's just too much. You're not going to be able to ask them direct questions, or if you are, I mean, you're going to be sending them over what's going to be like an hour-long survey, or you're going to be having, a 2-hour-long conversation. However you execute your beta testing, it's just too much. You're going to get poor feedback, and that's not going to help you, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to be forced to make even more assumptions on the feedback that you are getting, trying to figure out, well, what's the right feedback? Which should I be implementing? What should I be prioritizing? It's just, you're just not going to get good feedback. And when you're trying to scale your app and your business, you're going to have a very hard time. Now, looking on the flip side at the pilot app, this is the trajectory you are following when you launch your pilot app. And because you're building exactly what's needed to solve a core problem, you're building what's needed, right? Not what's wanted. You're limiting your assumptions as much as you can. You're launching early. Well, now you can get actionable feedback. Actionable feedback is when you can use the feedback to actually continue building out the app in a way that users need and then want. Remember, you're building what they need initially. When they give you feedback on how that helps them or how it doesn't, and what could maybe make the app more convenient for them, more enjoyable, easier to adopt, well, then you're just expanding on those needs, and you're adding in some wants, but you're not assuming what's needed or wanted. You're getting actionable feedback. It's contained, it's pinpointed, it's easy to work with, and it's easy to implement. It's easy to prioritize. Again, it's actionable, right? That is what you want. So if you're building a pilot app, right, ultimately, you are building the app with your users, and that's what you want. It's going to get them excited about the beta process. It's going to get you excited. It's going to get you up and running early, and it's going to get you scaling earlier and better, more efficiently, more effectively, right? When you are building your full scope app for your very first launch, and remember, most people don't realize they're doing this. Okay, so really think about this. If you're building your full scope app with your very first launch, you're not building your app with your users. You're building it for them based on your own assumptions. And that is not a smart way to do it. Okay. Now, if you are at the point where you are planning your app, you're in those planning stages, you haven't started building yet, or you've just started maybe you're in your first stages of development. In other words, you haven't had that initial launch yet, and you want to make sure that you follow this pilot process versus the full scope process. Then the next step from here is to join our free workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, which is going to walk you through the steps of how to plan out a pilot app for the development stages and a pilot launch. Okay, so again, if you haven't launched your app yet and you want to make sure you're doing this right, then head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, and you can join in on there. It'll be very valuable for you. Okay, I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.